I'm Brooklyn Thomas, 28 years old, and 6 months ago my world collapsed when my father died suddenly from a heart attack. I thought losing him was the worst pain I'd ever experienced, but what my brother Marcus did next was even worse. His what? If you've ever trusted someone completely only to have them destroy your life for their own gain, please let me know where you're watching from and subscribe to join others who understand this particular kind of family betrayal. Let me take you back to where this all started, because understanding my relationship with Marcus is crucial to understanding just how deep this betrayal cut. I met the love of my life, David, 4 years ago at a bookstore in downtown Portland. I was reaching for a copy of The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo on a high shelf, standing on my tiptoes in my worn Converse sneakers, when this tall guy with gentle brown eyes and paint-stained fingers appeared beside me. "Need help?" he asked. And when he handed me the book, our fingers touched briefly. I noticed he smelled like coffee and something artistic, turpentine maybe. He was buying 3 books about sustainable architecture, and when I commented on his choice, his whole face lit up. "I'm trying to figure out how to build homes that don't hurt the planet," he said, and I knew right then I was in trouble. We talked for 2 hours in the bookstore cafe, sharing a blueberry scone that was slightly stale but somehow perfect. David told me about his dream of starting an eco-friendly construction company, and I shared my passion for marine biology and my work at the Oregon Coast Aquarium. He had this way of listening that made me feel like every word mattered. When he walked me to my car, a beat-up Honda Civic with a Save the Whales bumper sticker, he asked if I wanted to get dinner sometime. "I know this little Vietnamese place that makes the best pho," he said, "and I promise the conversation will be better than it was today." I laughed and said yes before I could overthink it. Our first real date lasted 6 hours, sitting in that tiny restaurant with mismatched chairs and string lights, talking about everything from climate change to our mutual obsession with true crime podcasts. Those early months felt like discovering a secret room in a house I thought I knew completely. David would text me pictures of sunrises from construction sites where he worked as a project manager, saving money for his own company. I'd send him photos of the sea otters at the aquarium, especially Luna, a rescued pup who became our shared favorite. He started bringing me coffee every Tuesday, a vanilla latte with oat milk, exactly how I liked it, and staying to watch me feed the octopus. "You're fearless with that thing," he'd say, watching me handle Octavius, our giant Pacific octopus. "It's not fearlessness," I'd tell him. "It's respect. When you understand something, you're not afraid of it." He said that was why he was falling for me, because I understood things deeply, whether it was marine ecosystems or how to make him laugh when he'd had a terrible day dealing with difficult contractors. By month 6, we had our own language of inside jokes and shared routines. Saturday mornings meant farmers market trips, where David would buy ingredients for his famous breakfast burritos, while I picked out flowers for our tiny apartment. He'd make these elaborate weekend breakfasts, dancing around the kitchen to old Motown songs, wearing this ridiculous apron that said "Kiss the Cook," which I always did. Evenings often found us on our secondhand couch, my legs draped over his lap while we watched nature documentaries or worked on our respective laptops. He'd be sketching building designs while I wrote grant proposals for aquarium conservation programs. "We're such nerds," he'd say, but he said it like it was the best thing in the world. The next 3 years built us into something solid, something I thought was unbreakable. David's construction company, Green Build Solutions, slowly gained traction through word of mouth and his relentless dedication to sustainable practices. I watched him work 18-hour days, coming home exhausted but excited, telling me about solar panel installations and recycled material successes. "Today we used reclaimed wood from a 1920s warehouse for the kitchen cabinets," he'd say, eyes bright with accomplishment. The client cried when she saw it. Meanwhile, I advanced to senior marine biologist, leading educational programs and research initiatives. We tag-teamed household responsibilities without discussion. He cooked, I handled laundry, he managed car maintenance. I organized our finances with spreadsheets that made him shake his head in amazement. Our apartment gradually transformed from 2 separate lives merging into one shared vision. David built custom shelves for my marine biology books and research journals. I created a designated workspace for his architectural drawings and project binders. We adopted a rescue cat named Hemingway, who had an extra toe and an attitude problem, but who somehow became the perfect addition to our little family. Friday nights meant trying new restaurants or cooking elaborate meals together, usually ending with us covered in flour or sauce, laughing at our culinary disasters. David proposed on a Tuesday morning in our kitchen, ring hidden in my coffee mug. "I don't want to wait for a special moment," he said. Every moment with you is special. I said yes before he finished asking. This was our golden period. Those months between engagement and my father's death when everything felt perfectly aligned. We were planning a small wedding for the following spring, looking at houses we might afford with both our incomes, talking about kids and whether they'd inherit my stubbornness or his optimism. Sunday mornings became sacred, sleeping in until 9, making pancakes, reading different sections of the newspaper aloud to each other. David would read me interesting articles about green building innovations while I shared ocean conservation stories. We'd spend hours in bed, planning imaginary vacations, and discussing baby names we'd never admit to anyone else. Brooklyn Garcia has a nice ring to it, he'd say, and I'd pretend to consider it seriously before dissolving into giggles. Our typical weekday started with David leaving at 6:30, kissing me goodbye while I was still half asleep, coffee already brewing in the kitchen. I'd get up at 7, feed Hemingway, shower while listening to NPR, and head to the aquarium by 8. Evenings we'd decompress together, sharing the day's victories and frustrations. David would tell me about clients who wanted to cut corners on sustainable materials, and I'd vent about budget cuts threatening our education programs. We felt like a team facing the world together, supporting each other's dreams while building something bigger than either of us could create alone. I felt so secure in our love, so confident about our future, that I started taking it for granted in the way you only can when something feels absolutely permanent. But there were tiny cracks I should have noticed, moments that would later feel significant. Marcus had been calling more frequently, always with some financial crisis or business opportunity that never quite materialized. He'd ask casual questions about Dad's health, his investments, his plans for retirement. You know Dad's getting older, he'd say. Have you guys talked about his will or anything? I'd brush off these conversations, assuming Marcus was just being practical. David noticed before I did. Your brother asks a lot of questions about your dad's money, he observed one evening after Marcus had called during dinner. It's probably nothing, I said, but David's expression suggested he wasn't convinced. Just be careful, Brooklyn. Money changes people, especially when there's a lot of it at stake. The morning of March 15th started like any other Tuesday. David left early for a site inspection, kissing me goodbye and promising to pick up Thai food for dinner. I was reviewing quarterly budget reports at the aquarium when my phone rang at 11:47 a.m. The caller ID showed Providence Portland Medical Center, and my heart immediately started racing. Is this Brooklyn Thomas? The voice asked. I'm calling about your father, Robert Thomas. He was brought in by ambulance approximately an hour ago. The words that followed, massive heart attack, CPR attempted, too much damage, blurred together into a nightmare I couldn't process. I'm sorry, the doctor said. We did everything we could, but he didn't survive. I remember dropping my coffee mug, watching it shatter across my office floor in slow motion, the dark liquid spreading across papers I'd been working on just moments before. My father had been the steady constant in a childhood marked by my mother's absence and Marcus's volatile behavior. Robert Thomas was a quiet man who showed love through actions rather than words, teaching me to change a tire, helping me study for college entrance exams, supporting my decision to pursue marine biology even when others questioned its practicality. He'd built a successful accounting firm from nothing, working 70-hour weeks throughout my childhood to provide for Marcus and me after our mother left when I was 8. Dad never remarried, never complained about raising 2 kids alone, never made us feel like burdens despite the sacrifice. He attended every school play, science fair, and graduation, often the only parent in a sea of couples. When I introduced him to David, Dad's immediate approval meant everything. He sees you the way you deserve to be seen, he told me after that first dinner together. Now he was gone, and I was drowning in the impossible reality of planning a funeral while trying to process grief that felt too big for my body. My hands shook as I called David, my voice breaking as I tried to explain what happened. I'm coming right now, he said immediately. Don't drive anywhere. Don't make any decisions. I'll be there in 10 minutes. True to his word, David appeared in my office doorway looking like he'd run from his construction site, still wearing his hard hat and safety vest. He held me while I sobbed, making calls to arrange coverage for my responsibilities while I sat in his lap like a broken child. He drove me home, made all the necessary phone calls to relatives and family friends, and somehow organized the details I couldn't handle. What about Marcus? He asked gently.
Have you called your brother?
I tried calling Marcus 4 times that afternoon, each call going straight to voicemail. Marcus, it's Brooklyn. Please call me back immediately. It's about Dad. No response. I texted, emailed, even tried calling his office. By evening, I was frantic with worry and frustration. Where was he? How could I plan our father's funeral without his input? David suggested we drive to Marcus's house, but when we arrived, his neighbors said they hadn't seen him in several days. His business partner claimed he was traveling for work, but couldn't provide specific details. I spent that first night without my father wondering where my brother was, needing him desperately, unable to understand his disappearance during the worst moment of our lives. Marcus finally called back 3 days later, his voice casual and unconcerned. Hey Brooklyn, sorry I missed your calls. I was in Seattle closing a big deal for the company. What's going on? When I told him Dad was dead, there was a pause so long I thought the call had dropped. Wait, what?
Yeah.
When did this happen? His shock seemed genuine, but something in his tone felt off, like he was processing logistics rather than loss. The funeral is Saturday, I told him. I've been trying to reach you for 3 days. I needed help with the arrangements. Marcus's response chilled me. Well, I'm sure you handled it fine. You're good at organizing things. Listen, we need to talk about Dad's will and the business assets. Can we meet at his house tomorrow? No condolences for me, no processing of his own grief, just immediate focus on financial implications. We met at Dad's house the next morning, a modest 3-bedroom ranch where Marcus and I had grown up. Walking through those familiar rooms without Dad felt surreal and wrong. The kitchen still smelled like his morning coffee. His reading glasses sat on the dining room table next to yesterday's newspaper. His favorite cardigan hung on the back of his chair. I expected Marcus to share some of this emotional weight, to acknowledge the strangeness of being in Dad's space without him. Instead, he immediately started going through Dad's desk and filing cabinets with business-like efficiency. We need to find his will and any investment documents, he said, rifling through papers. The sooner we understand the asset distribution, the better. I stood in Dad's bedroom doorway, fighting back tears, while my brother treated our childhood home like a corporate acquisition. The will reading happened the following Tuesday at Dad's attorney's office, a wood-paneled room that smelled like leather and old books. Marcus arrived in an expensive suit I'd never seen before, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a confidence that seemed inappropriate for the circumstances. I wore the black dress I'd bought for the funeral, still feeling numb and disconnected from reality. Dad's attorney, William Patterson, had known our family for 15 years and offered genuine condolences before getting down to business. Your father was very specific about his wishes, he said, adjusting his glasses. He updated his will just 6 months ago, making some significant changes to the asset distribution. The reading confirmed what I'd always assumed. Dad had divided everything equally between Marcus and me, including his house, savings accounts, investment portfolio, and ownership stake in his accounting firm. But Marcus's reaction surprised me. Instead of relief or gratitude, he seemed agitated, asking pointed questions about liquid assets and business valuations. What's the timeline for estate settlement? He wanted to know. How quickly can we access the investment accounts? When Mr. Patterson explained the probate process would take several months, Marcus's jaw tightened visibly. That's not going to work for me, he said. I have immediate business obligations that require capital injection. Can we expedite this somehow? I stared at my brother, trying to understand his urgency. Our father had been dead for less than a week, and Marcus was already calculating profit margins and cash flow requirements. Something felt deeply wrong, but I couldn't yet put my finger on what.
And
That evening, David and I sat in our kitchen while I tried to process the day's events. Marcus is acting strange, I told him. Like he's more concerned about the money than the fact that Dad is gone. David listened carefully as I described my brother's behavior, his questions during the will reading, his apparent financial desperation. Has he ever talked to you about his business being in trouble? David asked. I thought back over recent conversations, remembering Marcus's frequent mentions of big opportunities and necessary investments that always seemed to require more capital than he had available. He's always been optimistic about his company, I said. Maybe too optimistic, but he's never admitted to any serious problems. David reached across the table and took my hand. Just be careful, Brooklyn. Desperation makes people do things they wouldn't normally consider. 3 weeks after the funeral, Marcus called with an unexpected proposition. I've been thinking about our inheritance situation, he said without preamble. I have a business opportunity that could benefit both of us, but it requires immediate capital investment. What if I bought out your portion of Dad's assets for cash? You'd get your inheritance right away instead of waiting for probate. My first instinct was suspicion. What kind of business opportunity? I asked. Marcus explained he'd been offered a contract to develop luxury condominiums in downtown Portland, but he needed proof of assets to secure the construction loan. It's a guaranteed profit, he insisted. We're talking about millions in potential return. But I need access to Dad's investment portfolio as collateral. Something about his tone made me uncomfortable, a desperation poorly disguised as excitement. I don't think that's how estate law works, Marcus, I said. We can't just transfer Dad's assets before probate is complete. But Marcus had done his research, presenting a plan that involved me signing over my inheritance rights in exchange for him paying me my share up front from his business accounts. Think about it, he pressed. You'd get $250,000 immediately instead of waiting 6 months and dealing with legal complications. You and David could buy that house you've been looking at, plan your wedding without financial stress. It's a win-win situation. The amount was substantial, representing exactly half of Dad's estimated estate value. It would indeed solve our immediate financial concerns and allow us to start our married life without debt or uncertainty. But David was adamant when I discussed Marcus's offer with him that evening. This doesn't make sense, Brooklyn, he said, pacing our living room with obvious agitation. If Marcus has enough liquid capital to pay you $250,000 immediately, why does he need your inheritance as collateral for his loan? And why is he so desperate to access those assets before probate? There's something he's not telling you. I wanted to trust my brother, to believe his explanation about business opportunities and mutual benefit, but David's questions highlighted the logical inconsistencies in Marcus's story. We decided I should ask for more specific information about his proposed development project before making any decisions. When I called Marcus back requesting details about his business opportunity, his response was evasive and defensive. Why do you need to know the specifics? He asked. Can't you just trust me? I'm your brother, and this is a legitimate business deal that could set both of us up for life. His reluctance to provide concrete information raised more red flags. I want to see the contract, the loan applications, something official, I insisted. If this is such a guaranteed opportunity, you shouldn't have any problem sharing the documentation. Marcus's voice grew cold. You know what, Brooklyn? Maybe I was wrong to try to help you. Maybe you'd rather wait 6 months and deal with probate lawyers and estate taxes. But don't blame me when you end up with less money and more headaches. He hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone in confusion and hurt. That night, lying in bed beside David, I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. He's hiding something, I whispered into the darkness. The Marcus I grew up with had many faults, but he was never deceptive like this. He's desperate about something, and he's not telling me what. David pulled me closer, his voice gentle but concerned. Maybe it's time to do some research, he suggested. If Marcus's business is in trouble, there might be public records, news articles, something that explains his desperation. I resisted the idea of investigating my own brother, but David's suggestion planted a seed of necessity. If Marcus wasn't going to be honest with me, maybe I needed to discover the truth independently. The next morning, I started with simple Google searches about Marcus's company, Thomas Development Solutions. What I found made my stomach drop. 3 recent articles in the Portland Business Journal detailed ongoing lawsuits against his company for breach of contract and failure to complete projects. One article mentioned significant financial irregularities and investor complaints about misused funds. Another described a failed shopping center project that left subcontractors unpaid and investors pursuing legal action. The picture that emerged was of a company in serious financial distress, with Marcus scrambling to avoid bankruptcy and potential criminal charges. My brother wasn't trying to help me access my inheritance early. He was trying to save his failing business using our father's money. Confronting Marcus with this information led to our first real fight in years. He initially denied the seriousness of his business problems, claiming the news articles were biased and the lawsuits were frivolous. But when pressed for specifics, he finally admitted his company was in trouble. Okay, yes, I've had some setbacks, he said, his voice defensive and angry. But that's exactly why this development opportunity is so important. It's my chance to recover everything and pay back the investors. If you don't help me, I'm going to lose everything, including any chance of rebuilding. His admission confirmed my worst fears, but his expectation that I should sacrifice my inheritance to save his business felt presumptuous and unfair. What happens if your development project fails? I asked. What happens to my inheritance then? Marcus's answer revealed the true scope of his desperation. It won't fail, he insisted. But even if something went wrong, you'd still be better off than waiting for probate. The estate could get tied up in legal complications for years if my creditors decide to pursue Dad's assets. His words sent ice through my veins. Was he threatening that his business problems could somehow affect our father's estate? When I asked directly if his creditors had any claim on Dad's assets, Marcus's non-answer told me everything I needed to know. He was in deeper trouble than he'd admitted, and he was willing to risk my financial security to solve his problems. That weekend, David and I met with our own attorney to understand the legal implications of Marcus's situation. What we learned was terrifying. If Marcus had used our father's assets as collateral for business loans without proper authorization, those assets could indeed be at risk during probate proceedings. While Dad's will was clear about the inheritance distribution, any debts or obligations he might have unknowingly assumed could complicate the estate settlement. Has your brother had access to your father's accounts or investment portfolios? The attorney asked. I thought back over the past year, remembering times when Marcus had visited Dad, helping with computer problems and organizing his financial documents. A horrible possibility began forming in my mind. Monday morning, I called Dad's bank and investment firm, identifying myself as his daughter and explaining that I needed to verify account activity following his death. What I discovered launched me into a panic that threatened to overwhelm my ability to think clearly. Over the past 6 months, there had been significant withdrawals from Dad's investment accounts, transfers that Marcus had somehow authorized using power of attorney documents I'd never seen or agreed to. Nearly $100,000 had been moved from Dad's portfolio into accounts associated with Thomas Development Solutions. And my brother hadn't just been planning to use our inheritance to save his business. He'd already been stealing from Dad while he was alive. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd ever experienced. Marcus hadn't just lied to me about his business problems or tried to manipulate me into signing away my inheritance rights. He had stolen from our father, violated the trust of a man who had worked his entire life to provide financial security for his children. The money he'd taken represented years of Dad's careful saving and investment, money that was supposed to ensure Marcus and I would have something to build our futures on. Instead, Marcus had gambled it away on failed business ventures, leaving Dad's estate diminished and my inheritance threatened. I sat in my car outside the bank, sobbing with rage and disbelief, trying to understand how my brother had become someone capable of such calculated theft. When I confronted Marcus with evidence of the unauthorized transfers, his mask finally slipped completely. Gone was any pretense of concern for my welfare or mutual benefit. Dad was getting old and making poor investment decisions, he said coldly. I was protecting his assets by moving them into higher yield opportunities. If he'd lived longer, he would have thanked me for the returns. His justification was so twisted, so completely divorced from reality, that I could barely comprehend how he'd rationalize stealing from our father. You stole from him, Marcus, I said, my voice shaking with fury. You stole from Dad while he was alive, and now you're trying to steal from me. Marcus's response revealed the depth of his entitlement. I'm not stealing anything. I'm the one who's been managing Dad's financial affairs. I'm the one who understands business and investment. You're just a marine biologist who plays with fish all day. That insult, dismissing my career and education as insignificant, crystallized something fundamental about how Marcus viewed me. Despite my graduate degree, my professional achievements, and my financial independence, he saw me as someone whose opinions and rights were secondary to his needs. He'd stolen from our father because he felt entitled to those assets, and he was trying to manipulate me because he assumed I was too naive or trusting to stop him. But Marcus had made a crucial miscalculation. He'd underestimated both my intelligence and my determination to protect what remained of Dad's legacy. If he wanted to treat this as a business transaction rather than a family matter, I was prepared to show him exactly how ruthless business could become. I spent the next week gathering evidence and developing a strategy. David helped me document every unauthorized transfer, every questionable business transaction, every legal filing that revealed the scope of Marcus's financial problems. We discovered his company owed money to dozens of creditors, including several who had already filed liens against business assets. More importantly, we found evidence that Marcus had forged Dad's signature on several financial documents, including loan applications that used Dad's house as collateral. My brother wasn't just facing business failure, he was looking at potential criminal charges for fraud and elder financial abuse. But I also discovered something Marcus didn't know. I knew the identity of his biggest client and the true scope of his desperation. Thomas Development Solutions had been hired by Hartwell Industries, a major Portland-based investment firm, to manage the construction of their new headquarters building. The contract was worth over $2 million and represented Marcus's last chance to salvage his company's reputation and financial stability. If he lost the Hartwell contract, his business would collapse completely, taking with it any hope of repaying the money he'd stolen from Dad. More importantly, Marcus had been lying to Hartwell about his company's financial stability, presenting falsified documents that showed Thomas Development Solutions as profitable and debt-free. If Hartwell discovered the truth about Marcus's situation, They would terminate the contract immediately and potentially pursue legal action for fraud. This knowledge became my weapon. Instead of continuing to argue with Marcus about returning Dad's money or settling the inheritance fairly, I decided to approach this problem from a position of strength. If Marcus wanted to treat our family relationships as business transactions, I would show him the consequences of that choice. I researched Thomas Hartwell, the company's founder and CEO, learning about his reputation for ethical business practices and his company's zero-tolerance policy for contractor fraud. Hartwell Industries had built their reputation on transparency and reliability, values that were completely incompatible with Marcus's deceptive business practices. I prepared a comprehensive dossier documenting Marcus's financial crimes, including copies of the forged documents and evidence of the unauthorized transfers from Dad's accounts. The night before I planned to contact Hartwell Industries, David and I sat up late in our kitchen, reviewing the evidence one final time. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked gently. "Once you make this call, there's no taking it back. Marcus will face serious consequences, and your relationship with him will be over permanently." I looked at the photographs of my father displayed on our refrigerator, images of him at my college graduation, at David's and my engagement party, holding our cat Hemingway during a family dinner. Dad had worked so hard to provide for Marcus and me, sacrificing his own comfort and happiness to ensure we had opportunities he'd never experienced. Marcus had repaid that sacrifice with theft and betrayal, then tried to manipulate me into enabling his crimes. "Dad deserves justice," I said finally, "and Marcus needs to face the consequences of his choices." The next morning, I called Hartwell Industries and asked to speak with Thomas Hartwell directly. His assistant initially tried to redirect me to the appropriate department, but when I explained I had urgent information about contractor fraud involving their headquarters project, she put me through immediately. Thomas Hartwell's voice was professional but concerned when he took my call. "Miss Thomas, I understand you have information about our construction project with Thomas Development Solutions. What specifically are you calling about?" I took a deep breath and began explaining the situation, starting with my father's death and Marcus's theft of estate assets, then moving to the forged documents and falsified financial statements Marcus had provided to secure the Hartwell contract. Thomas Hartwell listened without interruption as I presented the evidence, occasionally asking for clarification but never questioning the legitimacy of my claims. When I finished, there was a long pause before he spoke. "Miss Thomas, these are very serious allegations. If what you're telling me is accurate, your brother has committed fraud against both your family and my company. I'm going to need to see copies of the documentation you mentioned, and I'll need to involve our legal department immediately." His response was exactly what I'd hoped for: professional, decisive, and completely focused on the ethical implications of Marcus's behavior. "I can email you everything within the hour," I told him. "But Mr. Hartwell, I want you to understand something. This isn't just about business fraud. My brother stole from my dying father and tried to manipulate me into giving up my inheritance to cover his crimes. He needs to face consequences for what he's done." Thomas Hartwell's voice softened slightly. "I understand this must be incredibly difficult for you, Miss Thomas. Having to expose your own brother's criminal behavior takes tremendous courage. I want you to know that Hartwell Industries takes these matters very seriously, and we will pursue every available legal remedy. Your brother will not profit from his deception, and we will ensure that appropriate authorities are notified of his fraudulent activities." After I hung up, I sat in my office at the aquarium, watching Luna the sea otter play in her habitat, feeling a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and determination. I'd just destroyed my brother's business and possibly sent him to prison, but I'd also protected Dad's legacy and ensured that Marcus couldn't continue victimizing other people with his fraudulent schemes. The consequences came swiftly. By noon that same day, Marcus was calling me frantically, his voice panicked and desperate. "Brooklyn, what did you do? Hartwell Industries just terminated my contract, and they're demanding immediate return of all advance payments. They're talking about criminal charges and civil lawsuits. What did you tell them?" His assumption that I was responsible for his downfall was correct, but his tone, demanding rather than apologetic, confirmed that he still didn't understand the gravity of his actions. "I told them the truth, Marcus," I said calmly. "I told them you've been stealing from Dad's estate and lying about your company's financial status. I told them you forged documents and committed fraud to secure their contract." The silence that followed was deafening. "You destroyed my life," Marcus finally said, his voice cold with hatred. "You destroyed everything I've worked for, because you're jealous of my success and angry that Dad trusted me more than he trusted you." His attempt to reframe his criminal behavior as my jealousy was so absurd it was almost funny. "Dad trusted you with power of attorney for medical emergencies, not to steal his money," I replied. "And your success was built on fraud and theft. I didn't destroy your life, Marcus. Your choices destroyed your life. I just made sure you couldn't destroy mine too." Marcus's response revealed the true depth of his narcissism. "You'll regret this, Brooklyn. When I lose everything, you'll lose your brother forever." Is that what Dad would have wanted? His attempt to use Dad's memory to manipulate me after stealing from him was the final confirmation that Marcus was beyond redemption. Within a week, the legal consequences began cascading. Hartwell Industries filed both civil and criminal complaints against Thomas Development Solutions, providing evidence of the fraudulent documents Marcus had submitted. The district attorney's office opened an investigation into elder financial abuse based on the unauthorized transfers from Dad's accounts. Marcus's other creditors, learning about the Hartwell situation, began accelerating their own legal actions, filing additional liens, and pursuing immediate collection of outstanding debts. His company's assets were frozen pending resolution of the fraud charges, leaving him unable to pay employees or complete existing projects. The business empire Marcus had tried so desperately to save collapsed completely within 2 weeks of my phone call to Thomas Hartwell. But the personal consequences were equally devastating. Marcus's wife, Sarah, called me crying, explaining that she'd known nothing about his financial crimes and was filing for divorce to protect herself and their 2 young children from the legal fallout. "I can't believe he stole from your father," she sobbed. "I can't believe he put our children at risk with his lies. I'm so sorry, Brooklyn. I wish I'd known what he was doing." Other family members, cousins, aunts, uncles, who'd trusted Marcus with investment advice or business opportunities, began discovering they'd also been victimized by his schemes. The ripple effects of his fraud extended far beyond Dad's estate, affecting dozens of people who'd believed in Marcus's integrity and competence. The criminal trial lasted 3 months, during which Marcus maintained his innocence and attempted to portray himself as a victim of business circumstances beyond his control. His defense attorney argued that the transfers from Dad's accounts were legitimate business transactions authorized by valid power of attorney documents. But the prosecution's case was overwhelming, supported by handwriting analysis, proving the forged signatures, financial records showing the systematic theft, and testimony from multiple victims of Marcus's fraudulent schemes. Thomas Hartwell testified about the falsified documents Marcus had provided to secure the construction contract, and I testified about Marcus's attempts to manipulate me into signing away my inheritance rights to cover his crimes. The hardest moment came when the prosecutor asked me to describe the impact of Marcus's actions on my family. Standing in that courtroom, looking at my brother sitting at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, I struggled to find words that could encompass the depth of his betrayal. "Marcus didn't just steal money," I said finally. "He stole my father's trust, my security, and my ability to ever feel safe in my own family again. He turned what should have been a time of grief and healing into a nightmare of legal battles and financial uncertainty. He made me question every childhood memory, every moment when I thought my brother loved me, because someone who truly loved me could never have done what he did." Marcus stared at the table throughout my testimony, never once looking up to meet my eyes. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges: elder financial abuse, fraud, forgery, and theft. Marcus was sentenced to 5 years in state prison, ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, and banned from working in any financial or construction-related capacity for 10 years following his release. The judge's closing statement captured the severity of his crimes. "Mr. Thomas, you systematically exploited the trust of your dying father and attempted to defraud multiple victims through an elaborate scheme of lies and forged documents. Your actions demonstrate a complete lack of moral compass and a willingness to destroy family relationships for personal gain. This court finds your behavior particularly reprehensible, given that you targeted vulnerable individuals, including your own father during his final months of life." As Marcus was led away in handcuffs, he finally looked at me, his expression filled with pure hatred. "I hope you're satisfied," he mouthed silently. But I felt no satisfaction, only a deep sadness for the brother I'd lost and relief that his ability to hurt people was finally limited. The legal victory felt hollow compared to the cost, not just the money he'd stolen, but the destruction of our family relationship and the taint his actions had placed on Dad's memory. Standing outside the courthouse with David, watching the local news crews pack up their equipment, I realized that Marcus's conviction was just the beginning of a long healing process, not the end of the nightmare he'd created. The estate settlement took another 6 months to complete, complicated by the need to recover stolen assets and resolve claims from Marcus's creditors. Eventually, I received most of my inheritance, though legal fees and the complexities of untangling Marcus's fraudulent transactions reduced the amount significantly. More importantly, Dad's house and his accounting firm were preserved, allowing his legacy to continue through the business partners who purchased the firm and maintained its reputation for ethical practices. The money allowed David and me to buy our first home, a modest craftsman bungalow with a garden where we could grow vegetables, and a workshop where David could build furniture in his spare time. But the emotional recovery took much longer. For months after Marcus's conviction, I struggled with feelings of guilt and sadness that complicated my grief over Dad's death. Had I done the right thing by exposing Marcus's crimes? Could I have found another way to resolve the situation that didn't result in his imprisonment? David was endlessly patient with my conflicted emotions, reminding me repeatedly that Marcus's choices, not my actions, had led to his downfall. "You didn't make him steal from your father," he would say during my darkest moments of doubt. "You didn't make him forge documents or lie to clients. You just refused to let him get away with it." And that took incredible courage. Gradually, I began to understand that protecting myself and honoring Dad's memory required holding Marcus accountable for his actions, regardless of the personal cost. The most unexpected consequence was hearing from other victims of financial abuse who'd read about Marcus's case in the news. Dozens of people reached out to share their own stories of family members who'd stolen inheritances, forged documents, or manipulated vulnerable relatives for financial gain. Their messages helped me understand that Marcus's behavior, while personally devastating, was part of a larger pattern of elder abuse that affects thousands of families. Many of these people had chosen silence to preserve family relationships, allowing the abuse to continue unchecked. By speaking out, I'd not only protected myself, but potentially prevented Marcus from victimizing others in the future. 1 year after Dad's death, David and I held a small memorial service in our garden, planting a Japanese maple tree in his honor. We invited the friends and colleagues who'd known Dad best, sharing stories about his kindness, his work ethic, and his quiet strength. Notable by his absence was Marcus, still serving his prison sentence and having made no attempt to apologize or make amends for his actions. Sarah brought their children, who barely remembered their grandfather, but listened solemnly as we talked about the man they'd lost. "Grandpa Robert would have wanted us to remember the good times," Sarah said, "and to learn from the bad ones." Her words captured something essential about moving forward, without forgetting the lessons this experience had taught us. The business David started with our inheritance has grown beyond our wildest expectations. Greenbuild Solutions now employs 12 people and has completed dozens of sustainable construction projects throughout Oregon and Washington. More importantly, David has built the company on principles of transparency and ethical practices that stand in stark contrast to Marcus's fraudulent methods. Every client relationship is documented. Every financial transaction is verified. Every promise is kept. "I want to build the kind of business your father would have been proud of," David told me when we signed the papers for our first major commercial contract. "Something that creates value instead of stealing it. Something that builds community instead of destroying it." I returned to my work at the aquarium with renewed purpose, using my experience with Marcus's financial abuse to develop educational programs about protecting elderly family members from exploitation. The Safe Harbor program I created helps families recognize warning signs of financial abuse and provides resources for reporting and preventing elder fraud. It's become one of our most popular community outreach initiatives, reaching hundreds of families each year. When people ask why I'm so passionate about this issue, I share my own story, explaining how quickly a trusted family member can become a predator when money and desperation intersect. If it happened to me, I tell them it can happen to anyone. The key is recognizing the warning signs and taking action before it's too late. 2 years into Marcus's sentence, he finally wrote me a letter. It wasn't the apology I'd hoped for, but rather a continued attempt at justification and manipulation. He claimed his business failures were due to market forces and unfair competition, not poor decisions or fraudulent practices. He insisted he'd always planned to pay back the money he'd taken from Dad's accounts, as if unauthorized borrowing was somehow acceptable. Most tellingly, he blamed me for his imprisonment, arguing that I could have handled things privately instead of involving law enforcement. His complete inability to accept responsibility for his actions confirmed that I'd made the right choice in exposing his crimes. "Some people are too dangerous to trust," even when they share your DNA. The hardest part of this entire experience has been accepting that the brother I thought I knew never really existed. It's the Marcus who protected me from bullies in elementary school, who taught me to ride a bike, who seemed to care about my happiness and success. That person was either a carefully constructed facade or disappeared somewhere along the way, replaced by someone capable of stealing from our dying father. I've had to grieve not just for Dad, but for the relationship with Marcus that I thought we had. That grief is complicated by anger, relief, and a profound sense of loss that goes beyond money or legal outcomes. I lost my entire family of origin within the span of a year, left to build a new definition of family with David and the friends who've become our chosen relatives. But I've also learned something valuable about the difference between family by blood and family by choice. The people who supported me through this nightmare, David, of course, but also colleagues from the aquarium, neighbors who brought meals during the trial, and even strangers who reached out with encouragement, proved that love and loyalty aren't determined by genetics. Sarah, despite being Marcus's wife, chose to support justice over family loyalty when she learned the truth about his crimes. Thomas Hartwell, a businessman I'd never met, took my allegations seriously and acted decisively to protect his company and other potential victims. These relationships, built on shared values rather than shared history, have proven more reliable and meaningful than the family bonds Marcus destroyed with his selfish choices. Looking back now, I can see that this experience, as painful as it was, taught me essential lessons about protecting myself and recognizing red flags in relationships. Marcus's financial desperation created warning signs I should have noticed earlier: the increased calls about Dad's health and finances, the evasive answers about his business problems, the immediate focus on monetary matters after Dad's death. In future relationships, both personal and professional, I'll be more vigilant about people who show excessive interest in my financial affairs or who seem to view relationships as transactional rather than emotional. Trust, I've learned, should be earned through consistent behavior over time, not assumed based on family connections or past history. If you're watching this and you recognize elements of your own family situation in my story, please understand that you're not alone and you're not powerless. Financial abuse by family members is more common than most people realize, and it often escalates during times of crisis like illness, death, or economic hardship. If someone is pressuring you to make quick financial decisions, refusing to provide documentation for their requests, or making you feel guilty for asking questions about money, those are serious warning signs. You have the right to protect your financial security, even from family members, and you have the right to seek help from professionals who can guide you through difficult situations. The most important lesson I learned is that protecting yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. Marcus counted on my love for him, my desire to preserve family relationships, and my assumption that he would never deliberately hurt me. He used these natural human emotions as weapons against me, manipulating my grief and confusion to further his fraudulent schemes. If I had continued to prioritize family harmony over justice, Marcus would have successfully stolen my entire inheritance and potentially continued his criminal behavior with other victims. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to hold them accountable for their actions, even when that accountability comes with serious consequences. For those of you dealing with similar situations, please know that speaking up is scary but necessary. Document everything, save all communications, and don't hesitate to consult with attorneys or financial advisors who can help you understand your rights and options. If crimes have been committed, report them to appropriate authorities even if the perpetrator is a family member. I know how difficult that decision can be, but remember that financial abuse often escalates over time, and stopping it early protects not just you but other potential victims. The temporary discomfort of family conflict is worth avoiding the long-term devastation of continued financial exploitation. Most importantly, don't let someone else's criminal behavior define your self-worth or your future. Marcus's actions were about his character deficits, not mine. His willingness to steal from our father and manipulate me revealed his values, not my naivety or weakness. Recovery from family financial abuse takes time, but it's absolutely possible to rebuild trust, security, and hope after such a profound betrayal. Surround yourself with people who demonstrate care through actions rather than words, and don't be afraid to set strict boundaries with anyone who has violated your trust in the past. Today, David and I are stronger than ever. Our relationship tested and proven by the crisis Marcus created. We're planning to start a family next year, and we've had long conversations about how to raise children who understand the importance of integrity, empathy, and taking responsibility for their actions. Our children will know about their grandfather Robert's kindness and work ethic, but they'll also understand that family love requires mutual respect and ethical behavior. They'll learn that blood relationships don't excuse criminal conduct, and that protecting yourself and others sometimes requires difficult but necessary choices. If you've made it this far in my story, thank you for listening and for being part of a community that understands how complex and painful family relationships can become. Please subscribe if you'd like to see more content about protecting yourself from financial abuse, and let me know in the comments if you've experienced similar situations or if you have questions about resources that might help. Remember that your financial security matters, your emotional well-being matters, and you deserve relationships built on honesty and mutual respect, not manipulation and exploitation. The inheritance Marcus tried to steal has allowed David and me to build something beautiful together: a home, a business, and a future based on the values my father taught me through his example. That's the legacy I choose to honor, not the destruction Marcus tried to create. Sometimes the best way to love someone is to refuse to enable their harmful behavior, and sometimes the strongest thing you can do is to speak the truth even when it's difficult and painful. I hope my story helps you find the courage to protect yourself and the people you love, because everyone deserves to feel safe and valued in their most important relationships.